Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Ericetti from Narrative Mindworks, and this is our Mindworks chat topic, building your career in narrative practices. And one of the things that graduates from Columbia's CPA program or master's program often wonder, where are the jobs? Where's the career? And we're going to see that this is really a career that's emerging with no clear pathways. And so really excited to be talking with our guests, Nicole Robinson and Brendon Panke. And so before we get started, I'd love to get Nicole and then Brendon to introduce themselves, say something about who you are, where you're working, and then we'll start the conversation. So Nicole.
Everyone. It's so exciting to see so many familiar faces and new faces, folks I don't know. And I was combing the chat there and think this will be a fabulous conversation. So I'm Nicole Robinson. I am the narrative medicine coordinator at Akron Children's Hospital. I lead workshops for our staff, patients, and families. I predominantly am a part of the Hasslinger Pediatric Palliative Care Division, which I love to refer to as my family. They are fabulous. I'm based out of our Expressive Therapy Center. And although I'm predominantly in palliative care, I provide services throughout our hospital system, including workshops in our partial hospitalization program, intensive outpatient program. Both of those are behavioral health, addiction services, intensive outpatient program, and inpatient behavioral health, as well as receiving individual consults throughout our hospital system. And I would like to also say, I don't do this alone, because if you build it, they come. We built it, and they came, a lot of people throughout our hospital system. And so I was able to begin contracting other folks. And so I have 3 narrative medicine contractors that I work with, and so I would like to give a shout out to them because I would not be able to do all the things I just said without them. So I have Amanda D'Alessandro, Marina Vladova, and Kara Coleman, who help out with virtual workshops. And Amanda D'Alessandro helps with our regional partial hospitalization programs and our addiction services. So thank you for having me. Look forward to this
Great.
conversation.
And thanks for being here. And Brendon.
Hey everybody, I'm Brendon. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and I work at the Center for Healthy Minds, which is where I first heard about narrative medicine. I have a friend there, Robin Goldman, who had she had been at Columbia and had been, during some of the early days of narrative medicine, had been part of a book group with a bunch of folks in there. And she was like, "You're going to love this," because I have done narrative work for a long time now, in different places in the community, in prisons, um, and with the scientists at the center too, to help them deliver more impactful presentations to donors or to people who are interested in becoming in the science. Um, and so that's how I came into narrative medicine. And it really has impacted my practice a lot. I think my workshops are uh, deeper. They can go deeper with people as they work on their personal narrative. And I actually just thought narrative medicine was going to be like finally the piece of paper that was like, hey, look, I I'm just not making all this stuff up about narrative. I've been doing it for 10 years and I have a piece of paper. Um, but I really found that I love the practice and now I'm trying to expand that as well. And so I'm talking to a group of folks here who are experiencing symptoms of long COVID. And we're going to be doing some workshops together, I think. So I'm really happy to be here and thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the both of you for being here. And by the way, if people have questions along the way, please post them to the chat, and eventually we'll get to them. Derek will be minding the chat, and then about halfway through or so, we'll then open up this conversation to you, the audience, and with your questions, and would also love to hear your experience. So to just get started, Brendon, you said something that I think about a lot, and I know this is true in my conversations with you, Nicole, that prior to getting formal training in narrative medicine, there's always been an interest in stories, in art, in poetry, in literature. There's just a background that moves us towards this field. Then we find out this is an interesting field that really speaks to me. However, narrative medicine as a field is emerging with undefined career paths. And so I guess the first question I'd like to ask you is, how did you navigate this uncertainty when starting out in this career? Where did you begin? You probably didn't look at the want ads, but I'd love to know where you got started. So whoever would like to get started and take a shot
Sure,
at answering.
I can talk about it a little bit. Um, well, I was already doing narrative work. I have a background in the arts, like you mentioned. I was a owner of an improv troupe and performer, and did some stand-up, and then did storytelling and produced some storytelling events here in Madison and all over about the last 20 years. Um, and all these things that I did, all my performances was always very geared towards storytelling and personal narrative. But then when I started working with other people to help them uncover their story, um, that really grew to be like my biggest interest, and that's what drew me towards narrative medicine. From there, it was about figuring out the edges where I could work in. Um, and so there were some missteps for me. I thought at first, as I was getting involved, that I should, of course, go to the hospital, right? That's where there's other people doing medical humanities, and I should work with them because we're doing the same thing, and that's going to be really great. And um, it just didn't really bear fruit for me because, I get it. All those folks are, it's hard for them to do this work, and they have some teaching appointment. So that's how they work in their medical humanities work. Uh, and I really had to take a turn then, and I focused on relationships I had already built and people who had already been involved with me and with narrative, and started talking to them and helping that unfold. So um, the work in the prisons has been expanding for me. And this next semester, I'll be going to Cheetah, which is a women's facility in Wisconsin, and being part of a restorative justice circle and getting to do some narrative medicine type narrative work with the women in that circle, which I'm very excited about. So it really is a lot about the people that I'm around, and I thought I had to do all this like very hard work and build these networks, but honestly, I just have been focusing more on the networking and the friendships and the relationship that comes more easily to me. And building those relationships really is the important thing, so that it's more relational rather than transactional.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. First, a number of missteps, but working your network, seeing what they're interested in, what they want, because there is no direct career path into this field. It's largely about sussing out the fields, finding out what the needs are, and where this might fit in, and offering something in a different way that isn't currently being offered. Perhaps using arts and humanities perhaps in a qualitatively different way than they had even thought about. So how about you, Nicole? How did you begin? How did you start this path towards narrative medicine?
Well, when I was 9, I'm not going to start that far back, but truthfully, I started paying attention to the world around me and taking notes and listening deeply and writing when I was very young. So immediately I fell in love with literature and poetry, reading and writing when I was very, very young. And I do think it's important to note that, because as life continued and I had plenty of challenges as a child and adolescent, and in college just kept gravitating back towards the literary arts, and so ended up studying English literature, went on for a master's of fine arts in poetry, took the standard path, was teaching at Kent State University, where I also served as the assistant director of the Wick Poetry Center. I think that both my passion and curiosity have led me, and I want to take it back to something that Brendon said, that the relationships we meet along the way are relational and not transactional. I think that that is huge. When I was at Kent State and Wick Poetry, I had the privilege to develop a course called Teaching Creative Writing in the Community, where I taught poetry in prisons, shelters, K through 12 schools, hospitals. And when I started the work in the hospitals, I found myself very curious and interested in the intersections of the humanities and health. And so I just kept following that curiosity. And I was very fortunate along the way to meet Dr. Sarah Freebert, who is the founding director of the Hassinger Pediatric Palliative Care Division, and many others. I can't list all the names, or we'd be here a very long time. But Sarah really helped me see that the intersection of poetry and medicine was a lot more available than I was realizing. And so in 2017, I left Kent State University. I left that position, which a lot of my colleagues and friends in the world of poetry thought was an insane leap, right? An insane step to walk away from that. But I really found myself interested in narrative medicine. And so eventually studied narrative medicine at Columbia through the CPA program. In part, did that because I really wanted to do the master's, but at that time, I was leading workshops at Akron Children's and at a few other hospital systems in Northeast Ohio. And so the idea of walking away from those relationships to go study somewhere else for a bit didn't seem like a smart move. So studying the CPA program really grounded me and helped me develop a foundation. I think of I don't you all might know it, like the Thoreau quote. How does it go? Like, if you've built castles in the sky, your work is not lost. You just have to put the foundations under them. And I feel like that's what narrative medicine did for me. And right after I began the program and I studied in the CPA program, Akron Children's Hospital offered me a full-time position to develop narrative medicine here. And so I jumped and I went with it, and it's kind of what has led me here.
Yeah, a couple of things that you said really struck me. One is, this idea of, and one of the texts that I recommended that people read before this workshop was, "Do what you want and the money will, or do what you love and the money will follow." And so maybe it is like building sandcastles in the sky. This is what I love to do. And without thinking about the money, let me just pursue the activity that really grabs me. And the other thing also that you mentioned is the connection between poetry and healthcare, which I think is a really important issue because patients speak in poetry, clinicians speak in prose, often. You don't understand sometimes what patients really mean until you dig in and find the meaning. So I love those two connections. Plus the idea, and I'm sure this is true with you, Brendon, as well. You kind of apologized for saying that you started this at age 9. I think many of us started quite early in our careers in narrative medicine, even before it was a field. So one of the things I'd like to ask the both of you is, what transferable skills from your training in narrative medicine so far have really helped you to shape the path that you're on right now? What have you done before the training that you bring into your current work as a narrative practices person? What do you think?
I think the thing that I've really discovered from the CPA program, and I emphasize in this work, or is emphasized in this work for me, is that the idea of affiliation, and the the orientation towards that, is been really important in all my work, especially, going into prison where there's just like this uh, uh, vast power disparity, um, in all kinds of ways. Um, there's somebody in the community who's a colleague, and he has direct experience with incarceration, and he talks about the thing that you don't really understand is that, everybody there who has power over you, which is everybody, they can do whatever they want to you. And so if you have thought of something terrible, they're going to think of something more terrible eventually. And having somebody, like being able to sit with somebody where that's their orientation, like that's their expectation of the world, and let them understand that they're an expert in their own story, and what they want to tell the world, is a huge challenge. And I think the gentleness that comes from this practice, and that I've taken from it and learned from it, and the way that I can stand with somebody in affiliation, so that I'm not trying to be their voice, but I am trying to be there for their voice, is the thing that is the most important to me.
Yeah, and you said something earlier about your career in improv, your interest in improv. I mean, that really requires being in the moment with someone. Do you see a connection between your interest in improv and your connection to narrative work?
Yeah, I mean, I spent so long as an improviser that it's my major orientation towards the world is that, like, hey, let's see what we can do together, rather than what I can do or what you can do, and let's do this together. There's a book I've been thinking about a lot. It's called, A Minor Chorus, and there's a line in there about relationships, and it says something along the lines of, we are who we become together, with this idea that, um, you know, each person and each configuration of people, they give rise to a different identity, and letting seeing who those identities are, who those people are, who you become, is like a really joyful part of this work, and why I can do it in so many places. I think, like from prisons, to in the community, to whatever group I end up, might hire me, um, to a bunch of scientists. There, that goal, that ultimate goal of, like, who are we when we are together, is 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 just such a good foundation to build your sky castles on.
Yeah. And Nicole, how about you? What do you think about the transferable skills that you had that you've been working on since age 9 or before that you currently bring into your work now?
Well, I think similar to Brendan, who's mentioned his background in improv and stand up. You know, background of a poet is deep listening, not just to the people around us, but also the environment in which those people are living, the spaces that I inhabit and the spaces that others inhabit. Um, so I definitely, I was in some ways, I think I've said this in other interviews, providing narrative medicine workshops before I even knew that narrative medicine existed. Um, in part because when I was developing the teaching creative writing in the community course, I recognized that the traditional creative writing workshop was applicable, but also needed some shifting, because tearing apart a person's narrative right in the moment. If anyone's participated in the creative writing workshop, you know what that's like. Get your work torn apart, and here's how you can make it better. That didn't make a lot of sense if you were only meeting with folks once or twice, and that wasn't their goal. If that wasn't their goal, why would we rip it apart? So in developing that course, teaching creative writing in the community, we were looking at a variety of pedagogy and talking about, well, what other ways can we do that? And it led to not just a validation of the narrative, but I think Brendon said it really beautifully. It's not, it's not giving voice. It's not anything except for being there for others' voices. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, Brendon. And then I think that the narrative medicine training for me, though, like, I had the castle up in the sky or whatever it was Thoreau said, but I lacked, as desperately as I was searching it with my graduate students, I lacked that foundation. And I think narrative medicine and studying narrative medicine really provided me with that. It provided me with the language, it provided me with the evidence-based practices, the understanding. I had, research for a poet looks very different than scientific research, right? So it also provided me with skills for that. It prepared me to be able to sit down and partner with research scientists here in our Considine Research Institute. And so, yeah, I think that the skills that I developed early as a writer really prepared me for this work. And then the narrative medicine training almost built a bridge for me. If you look at the program at Columbia, and there are other programs starting to come up, and so my guess is that it's going to follow a similar path. 50% approximately are coming from the humanities side, and 50% are coming from the medical side. And for me, those relationships that I built and that I continue to build with some of the people on this call, Michelle Haywood, who came out to Akron Children's Hospital and spent a few days with me, or other physicians who've come out and shadowed, and there is something there with that partnership that exists between the humanities and those in medicine, and then the overlap that exists on that bridge. And I feel like that's what happens with narrative medicine, and that's really powerful. I couldn't do it alone. And I think physicians also appreciate the support from the humanities side, and it's what has led to a very successful narrative medicine program at our hospital system. I think I answered your question, Tony, but
yeah, you did, and you brought up this idea of the bridge, which I really like. You're both of you seem to have bridged your previous passions, your previous interests in stories and literature, combining with the training. I know, Brendon, you're currently in training right now. So I guess I have a really specific question for the both of you, is how did you take who you are, combining it with what you learned about narrative medicine, and sell it? Do you have any specific examples where you really had to sell the program to someone? And one of the things that we do in narrative medicine training is we always sometimes talk about the elevator pitch. What's our elevator pitch when we want to get the conversation started about a job or a career or a position or a program. How did you guys individually sell yourselves as well as your training? Do you have any specific examples? And I can understand if you're working with different constituencies, those
Um,
those conversations will be different. But what do you think?
Yes. So one of the things that I really, for people who've been directly impacted by incarceration, there's nothing you can, everything you say, you have to back up with action. And so I tried to lead with action as much as possible, and to make sure they had the space, like Nicole was saying, like the poet's attention to the space and not just the people. Um, but my favorite selling point is, um, one of my colleagues, Deb. She says that she just uses all the skills that she learned from selling crack, but now she uses them for good. And she gave me this great line about uh, talking about the gift and the gift of the practice to people, and really making space in there. And I sold it as a way to approach. So like pace and intensity has always been a big problem at my work, where we're doing a lot in a very broad area of well-being, right? And it's something we had that had become pretty intractable, where it was the perennial topic of coming up. And so um, with narrative medicine, I think you with the workshop structure, you can more directly address well-being by approaching it, and think give people the space they need to really address it in themselves, and not just in their work or those outside of us. So I think that that was really important to pitch it and wait for the right moment. Um, if I had tried to pitch this 5 years ago, um, I needed to do it all as like, oh, this will help us find donors. And now, after the pandemic and the grief that so many people we've all experienced, I think there's more attention to that space and a chance to address it directly.
Yeah, when you said space too, my mind automatically shifted to the logistics of running a program. So much of this work is about scheduling, people in the room, scheduling. If you're working certainly with medical residents, eking out the time to do this is also something that has to be sold or developed along the way. That there's lots of perhaps logistical obstacles that get thrown up, as well as perhaps theoretical. How about you, Nicole? How did you what's your style of selling? I'm saying
Well,
selling,
I
that
don't mean to
that
be,
that
I
would
don't
be,
mean to be harsh, but I really don't like that terminology. I
yeah,
don't. I think that I'm a language person, and selling feels transactional. It's
yeah.
so I don't like that terminology for myself. I think that, instead of having to sell the program, I think often I have to demystify it. I mean, rarely do I find providers in our hospital system or outside of our hospital system who just think, oh, people's stories don't matter. In all honesty, I don't think that I've run across that at all. Um, I think the question is like, if there's resistance, it's, oh, that reminds me of English class. And then I have to demystify that a little bit. Like, unfortunately, our education system has taught you that the color blue represents heavy sadness, when really we meet art halfway with our own lives. So I there's a demystifying to it. And then I think that there's an evidence base that we have to present. And there is a lot of, I recently had a physician from Cincinnati Children's. Oh, I don't have his name written down. Look at me scrolling through to see if he's on here. But so I can name him. Those who know me know I'm terrible with names. But at any rate, we were talking about the research of narrative medicine and how it is this empty field in so many ways. But at the same time, there are pieces and parts of narrative medicine that have been studied. Look at Pennebaker and all the work he's done on writing, and his colleagues. So there's been or the research behind the benefits of telling one's story orally, that has some research in it. Morris Spiegel recently did a study, and she quotes some of that in her study. So I think when I took this position on the very first day of my full-time position, when I took the position and helped create the position, I met with our research scientist the very first day, and I said, all right, I'm not going to have a lot of time because I know that I already have all these things I have to do. But what am I already doing that can also be studied so that we can provide even more evidence base for it? Because even if you're looking at pediatric illness narratives, a lot of the research prior has been on the parents telling of the pediatric patient's story. And so one of the first things we did is I said, I don't know if this is data, but and I plopped 120 plus pediatric illness narratives down. And the first thing we did, and it was important to me, was listen to the people that I was serving and their words. So less selling, more holding space to meet people where they are, including providers, including hospital administrators. At the end of the day, whether we like it or not in this country, healthcare is a business. It's a nonprofit sometimes, but it's still, money has to be thought about. So for example, one of the studies that I wanted to focus on was looking at parents who have children in the ICU because of the high rates of post-traumatic stress symptoms. And we know that writing has a lot of benefits to help with post-traumatic stress symptoms. So what would it look like if we looked at narrative medicine interventions in that way, which goes beyond just writing? There's a lot of active listening and holding space for others. So I think just looking at where the gaps are and looking at not just what, I don't look at just what I'm currently doing, but I'm trying to look at what others are doing around the world as well, and see where are our gaps and how can I help fill them, and who are the people that I can partner with and talk to and try and demystify instead of quote unquote selling it. I would fail as a salesperson. I once worked at a coffee shop in college where we were supposed to sell larges, and I'm like, actually, if you just get the medium and don't put the ice in it, it's the so I'd be a bad salesperson. I'd be really bad at it. But I think if we just come from a really authentic place of saying, we know something is real here, we know something is true, and we don't have it all, and we're just honest about that, and we say it, we don't have all the science behind it, but help me get there. You will meet people who help you get there.
Yeah, I love the idea that that there, in order to create a place for yourself in this field, we have to look at what work has already been done. That narrative medicine is highly derivative of other fields, of small group training, creative writing. Close reading is a term that's been around since the 1920s. There's really nothing new in many ways about narrative medicine except the way that it's been put together. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about selling. I think you have to sometimes talk to people in their own language. I'll just give one brief example of dealing with ego. When I was assigned to start a simulated patient program at a med school in New York, Dean was highly reluctant. And I knew all the stuff, why it could make their life better and so forth. This training, I said, look, this program, my job is to make you look good. Because simulation is a big field. And that appealed to him. So, being a psychologist, I tried to find what is appealing to the person that I'm dealing with. I wouldn't use the word demystification for me, but we all have to find our ways of promoting something that will be of value, I think, to these folks. I have one more
Yeah,
question.
I
Behind the word
do. Oh,
promoting, Tony, just
Oh,
not
go ahead.
selling.
Was that?
I she
Yeah.
I
said she's
said I can
behind.
get behind the
Yeah.
word promoting, but not selling, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah. I do want to follow that up on Nicole's point, because I think it's a really good one. And it goes to something we talked about earlier about the relational aspects of it. And
Yeah.
that's what I was describing. So when I was trying to sell me and myself to the folks over at the hospital here, it didn't work. But when I was able to fall back on like the promotion of these things or
Yeah.
the demystification of them to people I had a relationship with, then that's where I really have been moving. Um, so I gotta
And
lean with Nicole on this one.
yeah, in some ways, Brendan, I think too, I mean, think about our narrative medicine training. Um, I think that when someone is hesitant in wanting to create a workshop series or a course or whatever it may be, what is our job as narrative medicine practitioners or facilitators or first I need to listen to them and really hear them closely and hear their fears and hear what their concerns are. And I think that's what you're talking about, Tony. I think the person wants to know, well, and sometimes that other person, the concern is, how's this going to save me money?
Right.
How is this going to be relevant to the work we're doing? And then we address it. So that's why I hesitate on that statement of selling, because selling means I'm coming in with an agenda and I'm going to make you win, or like I'm going to win on this. Instead, it's, what's your hesitation? Like, I have this and tell me more. And then we listen and then we address the gaps. So it's not always a demystification, true. But it is not just being it's, I think it's maybe living our profession more so than only doing it when I am reading a poem or looking at a painting and then providing some support. Like it's in the very instant of the conversation that I am present with you. I am listening. I'm noticing your fears. I'm noticing where your interests are, and then I'm moving forward and presenting something that's going to be helpful for both you, your bottom line, whatever else may come.
Yeah. I think it's up to, I love the disagreement, which is partly why we're here. We love to bring up these controversial topics. Um, is it selling? Is it demystification? Is it about relationships? I think there is something transactional as well. What's in it for me? What are you going to do for me that's going to improve this this school, this program, the outcome? So we can use different language to describe what we're intending to do. Derek, what are your thoughts? Should we open this up to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some good discussion about people are interested in an elevator pitch workshop, like something we could do to co-create to help people. So this whole discussion has really spawned some new discussion. And then also there's a question posed. It says, you both work with prison populations. Have you worked with any undocumented people being held in detention? And if so, is there a difference between their narratives and responses and the general population's narrative?
So I have worked with folks who are incarcerated, and I have worked with folks who are undocumented, but not who were being held per se. I've worked with a large refugee and immigrant population here, which led to others coming into the workshop as well. And so I can't fully answer that in a comparative way, I don't think, because those who were undocumented, living in our country, were not necessarily in, yeah. So, but Brendon, have you worked with both
No, similar for
incarcerated?
me. I no, I haven't worked with any undocumented populations that are in detention. Yeah.
Well, one thing this really reminds me of, that question that came up, and it's something I really firmly believe in, that the action of any field is really in the margins. It's not in the center. I think of academia as being in the center of things, which, perhaps provides a bridge to actual practice. But I love to look at what's not being done, what in narrative medicine, what voices are not being represented, what's not being done that I can do as well. And Nicole, you brought up, looking at the current research and other practices. So combining those two things, um, this is definitely a field that's emerging without, again, clear guidelines on how to do this.
I could add on slightly though to the question that Derek brought up from the chat. I can't look at the chat while we're talking. I get too distracted and my mind wanders. But I do think, in terms of, is there a difference in their narrative? I think that there is a difference in the narrative, even with two people incarcerated in the same place for the same thing. There's going to be a difference because they have different lived experiences. So I think, again, we go back to meeting people where they are and looking at those narratives. Now, I haven't done specific research on zooming in on folks who are incarcerated, but even looking at the pediatric illness narratives compared to adult narratives, using like Arthur Frank's categories of quest.
Restitution.
Restitution and
Chaos.
Chaos. Chaos.
Chaos.
Yeah, it is chaos. It's chaos. But looking at those, in the adult world, a lot of times it's restitution. That's where a lot of illness narratives will fall under. And then in the pediatric world, what we noticed was it's not so much restitution and getting back to who we are, but instead it's the where am I? It's the quest narrative. Who am I? Who will I become? And so that was an interesting finding. So I think we could look. That would be an interesting study to whomever raised that question. Could look at it broadly and be able to have some kind of understanding. But at the end of the day, I also believe that two people going through the exact same experience will have their own individual narrative.
Yeah,
That's
the
the
Wonderful question, though.
Yeah.
One thing about prison narratives of students and folks in prison is that those are really heavily influenced by the institution, right? So there's certain kinds of narratives they want to cultivate, and here you parrot or believe so that you can work towards early release. And that's a game that has huge incentives. And so one of the things that I think is really powerful is reminding people that they're the experts in their stories and they have to be excited to tell these stories, whatever they may be. Oh, and to people who are interested in an elevator pitch, I've started developing one of the workshop around elevator pitches for trainees at CHM at my work. So I'd love to work with people on developing that more and workshopping it. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and when you are in narrative medicine at a hospital, you literally have to do a pitch in the elevator.
Is that not selling? Never mind. We'll have to go there.
No, Tony, I don't want to sell things.
Okay. Yeah, I don't either. I'm a terrible
No, but
salesperson.
it's education instead, but
Okay.
I do think it's a great question.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? What is the sentence? I truly think the best sentence is found, well, it's right in the jacket right here, right? Like, the, that narrative medicine is a discipline of healthcare that helps patients and professionals tell and listen to story. It's
Yeah.
one tiny sentence, and it opens a door for others to want to expand and ask more questions, and people can understand it.
And that statement sold that book. I'm not gonna kill
Tony and I, for the next narrative Mindworks, there will be a boxing match.
We love the verbal sparring.
I love Tony, everyone. I'm giving him a hard time.
No, I think we're just talking about metaphors. What metaphors do we want to apply, given the audience that we have to demystify this or promote this or sell it to? Derek, any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a theme emerging in the chat that's echoing what people have said about customizing work to particular audiences. So 3 things sort of interact. There's a question about the notion of the outsider, a notion of working with people where English is not their first language. And then is there an approach where narrative medicine is practiced one-on-one dyadically versus with a group? So that's kind of under the same umbrella, but maybe if Brendon or Nicole have experience either working with people in other languages or one-on-one, or if there's this notion of the outsider as a theme.
Yeah, so I can speak to the one-on-one, and because I do small group work a lot with people uncovering their narrative. And while it's a small group, oftentimes you're sitting with one person's narrative and really going deep into that. And I've come across times where I've, with witnesses like the rest of the group, had to dig real deep into why somebody was thinking about telling a certain narrative. And usually my concern was that they were too self-deprecating, that they were using themselves in service to the audience rather than like lifting themselves to be understood. And almost like they were trying to have themselves be misunderstood. And that's just, it's delicate. Like whatever you're doing in a group, because it's just the two of you, you have to slow it down even more and not feel like you're wasting time. And there's a lot more silence then because it's the two of you and waiting for those the reactions to surface, I think. So silence is super hard for me. And so that's a practice that I've really had to lean into or sit back in, maybe is better for silence, and still a challenge.
Well, you really bring up an important issue, whether it's done in a group or individually. So much of narrative practices promote self-reflection. And for that, you really need a certain amount of curious questions and silence to hear the response so that people can really hear themselves, and perhaps even some active listening approaches. Because sometimes my experience is that unless you reflect back what people have said to them, they sometimes don't even hear themselves. So I love this idea of doing narrative medicine in a, with individuals as well as, with groups.
So
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm
Please.
sorry, Tony.
Oh,
I just wanted to touch upon both really briefly. So I here at Akron Children's, I'm actually in our EPIC system, our electronic medical chart. So I receive consults throughout our hospital system to meet with patients and families individually. So I work one-on-one. That's the bulk of a lot of what I do. And so providers are allowed to, when they put in the consult, it might be for family support. They might have selected something like psycho-emotional support. Maybe they write in very specifically patient interested in writing their story. And so I show up in the room and the first thing I do is listen. I talk with them. I tell them, sometimes they want to know how I've worked with others. And so I give some different examples. A lot of times we end up reading something, talking, doing a little bit of writing, sharing with one another. But to give a quick example, which I am changing some details just to protect the person's privacy, but teenage boy who was admitted to the hospital who wrote, and it was a very long admission, over 3 months, and wrote numerous short stories. And what we did, and by short I mean micro fiction, tiny flash fiction, what we ended up doing was, after a period of time, I started noticing that their narratives were repeating themselves. They were writing about a lot of the same thing, even when we were looking at a completely different painting or talking about a completely different poem or story. And so then what we did is we took a wall and we hung up all of their stories, and then they looked at them and said, and I said, are you noticing anything about the main character? The story is repeating itself. And so then we were able to start filling some of those gaps. So I think individually, when I'm working with people, it always looks a little bit different, but it always begins with listening. And then because I come from a poetry and literature world, I have this Rolodex of things in my head, and a poem pops up and I know this might be applicable for us to read and talk about right now, or a short story or something. So and then for the language barrier, that is a major challenge of mine. I run into our interpreters, and our interpreters, for those who don't know, interpreters and translators are very different people. And translation is an art. It's a very high art form. And so I have a lot of hesitation from some of our interpreters in collaborating with me, because the idea of translating a poem or a story on the spot is very intimidating and very difficult work to do. And so I am open to hearing from colleagues on that language barrier aspect. So thank you.
Tony,
Okay, great. We've got about, yes, please. Yeah, but
I was
Derek,
going to give you the 3-minute countdown, and there's
Yes.
one great bridge question that's just hanging in the air that I would love to pose to Brendon and Nicole. You talked about building bridges tonight. How do you deal with physicians who might say, you're not a doctor, you don't deal with the things we deal with, so you don't get it? Thank you, Maggie, for that question.
I think
Great
that's a
question.
beautiful question. I think it goes back to, you're right, it goes back to that bridge. When I develop curricula for physicians, I do not do it alone. I recognize that I have gaps. I am not a physician, and I do not pretend to be, nor do I pretend to know what they need. And so I partner with physicians in developing that curricula. I ask questions. I make sure a palliative care physician might not know exactly what the intensive care unit needs that day. So I might be partnering with multiple physicians from different divisions, and I respect their knowledge and do what I do with anyone one-on-one, and I listen to their needs and then develop the curriculum accordingly. I have actually never run into anyone who said, you're not a physician, you don't get it. I teach at Northeast Ohio Medical University, and in our reflective practice, it is a humanities person paired with a physician, and we co-teach the same group of cohort. We get a cohort of M1s, and we have them all 4 years, and we do that together. So I really think it is a beautiful partnership. And if we look at narrative medicine programs, we're seeing 50-50. So let's overlap and work together is my thought.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that if you work in a rigid hierarchy such as medicine, you may need find a champion that will work with you, that can help you open some of the doors that perhaps we can't, if we're not higher up on that hierarchy. And Brendon, I'm going to give you the last word on this, on that question that Derek brought up in the minute
Sure.
that we have. Yeah, what would,
That's great because I don't have a lot of experience with working with physicians. I work with scientists though and faculty.
yeah.
And while I can't touch on all their experience, I listen for the places where I can, and that's where we start building. And there might be parts of their experience that I'll never touch on. Like Nicole said, I have gaps. And not all gaps are meant right. Like I'm not trying to build a better version of myself. It's not like all the gaps need to be filled. They just need to be recognized and honored, and let those be filled by other people who understand it.
I'm going to just say that the both of you seem to use narrative medicine skills in relating to the people that you need in order to build the program. You know, you have to listen intently to what their needs are, what their story is, what's important to them. Those are all things that come up in the whole narrative medicine arena that can be then transferred to demystifying or selling or working with people to building programs. And with that, just want to thank both of you, Brendon and Nicole, for this wonderful conversation.